Hey,
Hey,
Daniel, how's it going?
good. How you doing?
Very good.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Get us all set up. I see some people are starting to trickle in. And then I'm just keeping an eye out for Ed, right?
Yep.
Cool. So I'll let him up on stage once he gets in. I'm just enjoying my background here. I just saw it's one of the options. I feel so tropical. Got my
Right. I wish I was there right now. Looks good.
got myself a refreshing yerba mate. Oh, there we go. You can't really see it. Very, very beachy.
Nice.
Where are you today?
I am in Buffalo, New York, in the Seneca One Tower right now.
Cool. How's Buffalo this time of year?
Better than it was a couple weeks ago. You know, we had those fires from Canada turned the entire area into like a campfire. Pretty much, it was wild. But now air quality is much better. Temperature is, fine. Some of the places in the world are just cooking right now. So I'm pretty happy that it's a little bit cooler out here,
All right. I just promoted Ed, so he should be coming up. I'm just gonna check something. Hello, everybody who's joining. We're just gonna get started in a few minutes here.
Nice.
Hey, Ed.
Ed.
Hey, can I just say that's the fastest promotion I've ever gotten?
Yes, I looked at your previous performance before promoting you to panelist.
There you go. There you go.
Just passed all across the board. Unfortunately, it doesn't come with any kind of a pay raise or anything.
Oh, I know, right?
All right. So we've got some people trickling in. We'll just give people a few more minutes to join up. How's that? Is that better? We got our old startup. I'm just checking my list of Zoom backgrounds. There we go. That feels a little more professional.
I like the tropical one.
Yeah, just I'd like to bring some levity to this serious topic. Oh, should we do a dog check? Anybody else?
No, unfortunately, I'm at the office and they're not friendly for dogs over here.
All right, well, this is just for our early attendees, a little Easter egg. Are you gonna present from your screen, Sean, or do you want me to pull up the PDF that Graham sent me? Or
if you wouldn't mind pulling it up, I think that would be excellent. Because I don't have it handy at the moment.
okay.
I could also get it from Graham. He's one room over, but
No problem. Hey, everybody who's joining. We'll just get started in a few seconds here. Just the usual few minutes of courtesy. Maybe we'll get started in, I think, a minute. We can start doing some intros.
cool.
Right. Ed, where are you based?
Denver.
Denver. All right.
How about you all?
I'm in sunny Los Angeles,
Nice.
Santa Monica by the beach.
Oh, that's rough.
Yeah,
I'm
finally.
in Buffalo, New York.
Yeah.
Are you? Oh, wow. Buffalo gets a bad rap. I always like Buffalo.
All right. Well,
Go Bills.
starting to get a good number of people.
Good season this year.
Yeah.
Why not? So I'd say let's go ahead and get started. Let me pull up the deck here. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. So let me get the slides up here. Okay, perfect. So today we've got Sean and Ed. So Sean from Kickfurther and Ed from AVL. So probably you guys can see the bios here, but probably I'll just pass to you guys to maybe just go through your backgrounds here before we get into the topic today.
Yeah, absolutely. Should I start?
Sure.
Yes,
Well, so I am, as it says here, I come from a supply chain background. My parents run a supply chain management company called CPG Merchandising. So that was really where I cut my teeth on the entrepreneurship journey, was helping other entrepreneurs kind of dial in their supply chains. I went from that to starting my own product business where we took products from manufacturers in China, customized them a little bit, and sold them to retailers here in the US. And that went really well until we essentially hit the supply chain crunch and supply chain finance issue that so many entrepreneurs experience. And at the time, we went out to market to find some finance, and there was just very few compelling options. So just really expensive stuff out there. So we thought that there was an opportunity to create a better solution. And so, about 9 years ago now, it'll be 9 years in August, we created Kickfurther as an inventory funding marketplace. And so, it's kind of came out of my own personal experience, seeing how painful that inventory finance problem can be for a growing product business.
amazing. All right. Ed, do you mind doing your intro as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love the way Sean included some history, like some family history. I'm a finance geek by training. I love manufacturing. I love, just the idea of creating product. So even though I'm on the finance side, I'm really happy to have been part of some amazing organizations and help drive different businesses forward. I kind of have rised up through the ranks of finance. I've been very fortunate, though, in my career to have managed directly, which, it's funny to say for a finance geek, to manage directly, like quality, regulatory, manufacturing, logistics, customer service. So I had some, mentors and managers early in my career who gave me a shot that I still think they're crazy too, but they did. But yeah, I for the last 12 years have been working as a CFO, both directly for companies as an embedded employee, and then I also do consulting for them. And it's been an amazing experience. I love the companies I've helped. Everything from life sciences to CPG to manufacturers to SaaS. It's been quite fun to help a variety of businesses, and so I both understand as a functional executive, having worried about logistics and supply chain, but also as the finance arm, having to figure out how do we actually fund, and particularly for CPG businesses, it's so important to have that inventory. The last thing in the world you want to do is have a stock out, particularly, a customer coming to you, you've created all this demand and all of a sudden you have nothing. So I'm excited to talk today because in particular, I have one client who has, started with Kickfurther, and we're having an amazing experience. And it's actually, well, we can talk about it more, but it's been really beneficial to that business. And I think it actually probably turned the corner for the business. We didn't have a lot of other options. So
Nice.
Great. Cool. So we'll be talking just kind of in general about cash flow challenges for everybody today. I think maybe Sean, you could just mention a little bit more about like what Kickfurther does, just so everybody understands why you guys know so much about this topic before we kind of jump into the specific questions. And also, guys, the Q&A is open. Please, if you have specific stuff you want us to get to, dump it in there. It's for everybody to learn. So please don't be shy. Sean,
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, what Kick Further is, so essentially there's this issue of inventory finance, right? So to describe the issue, at a super high level, you have to pay somebody to make your stuff, or you have to pay somebody for the raw materials so you can make your own stuff, right, before you get to sell it. And that just creates this ongoing, what we call like a cash flow gap, right? So you have to keep the lights on, you got to pay salaries, you've got overhead in your business. All of those things erode your cash position, and then you get these great growth opportunities, increasing customer demand. Maybe you have a wholesale opportunity open up, whatever else happens. And then all of a sudden you have this big need for cash, right? Like, oh man, I need to go pay a factory 100 grand or 200 grand now to make the stuff so that I can keep growing my business, right? And again, you're running your business, you're paying overhead, rent, lights, all of those things. And so what typically happens with a product entrepreneur, and this, kind of depends on the strength of the margins here, is that without a finance solution, right, their growth is stymied. Okay, like a business that could grow 100% with finance, without finance maybe grows 10 or 15 or 20% a year, because they have to come up with all that cash themselves. And like Ed said, if you stock out, right, you're cooked. And not only are you cooked, but actually you wasted a ton of money in building all of that consumer demand just to lose it to a competitor, right? Especially if you're selling something like soaps or anything like that, any product that is replaceable and repeatable, it's really, really painful to introduce your customers to a competitor just because you ran out of inventory, right? So it sounds crazy, but this problem is literally endemic for every single product entrepreneur deals with this, right? And there was never a one size fits all solution. There was never a solution created specifically to address the issue of inventory finance, right? You have these other things like AR factoring, you've got daily debit, merchant cash advance products. But we really wanted to focus in and hone in on this idea that inventory is an asset. We can turn inventory into an investable asset class, right? By, making sure that we are, qualifying and doing a good job of identifying growing product businesses and creating that access to a liquidity market so that they can get the finance they need. And so we've taken a slightly different approach to it than I think pretty much everyone else has, right? Everybody else, as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but everyone else pretty much wants to loan you money, right? Kind of loan you money in one way or the other. And what we've done at Kick Further is created a marketplace where other liquidity providers, family offices, individuals, whoever else, can actually buy the inventory you want to sell as you're growing your business. They'll buy the inventory at cost from your manufacturer. They'll place it on consignment with you, the product business, and then as you sell through that inventory, you pay for the inventory as it's sold. So the idea is that we've kind of eliminated that cash flow gap, right? Where you don't have to pay up front, somebody else pays up front, and then as you sell through the inventory, you get to pay for that inventory from the revenue you generate. So, for a growing product, the idea is that we want to be able to support growing product businesses at many different stages. And I think we provide funding to businesses with as little as $500,000 of trailing 12 months revenue.
With as little as 500,000, you said trailing 12.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So we've got some, we don't have a ton of slides, just so everyone knows. We just kind of have some discussion topics to go through today. And again, if you have any questions that you'd like to contribute, please put those in through the Q&A box. So yeah, let's jump in, and then I'm definitely going to have a bunch of questions as well to come in with. But the first one that we have here is, what are the cash flow challenges that are unique to CPG companies during growth? So I know you talked a little bit about some of that, but any other things you want to add on or go into?
I don't know if Ed wants to add anything. I would say it's particularly consumer product goods companies are just incredibly capital intensive, right? If you want to grow by 100% a year with the consumer product goods business, you have to apply 100% more capital, to buying the inventory, right? And that's not the same for like a software company where once you've created something, you can scale. So it's a much more capital intense business to grow. And the faster you grow, the more that is true, right? I think, who was it? Like the founder of Nike and Shoe Dog, talks about how when Nike was growing 100% every 6 months, right? It was like incredibly challenging to find the finance to support that level of growth. And also, like, typically investors don't really like inventory, right? Like banks don't like it, traditional lenders don't really like it, and that makes it even more challenging in the early stages to find that capital support to fund your growth.
Well, I would add on to what Sean said. I mean, part of the problem is you have a reactive environment as opposed to a proactive. One of the things that we liked about the Kick Further model is it's proactive. Because the problem is, an asset backed, you need to actually own the asset. So you need to front the cash to get the asset to then get the financing. It's reversed if you think about it. So if you're able to have, in this example, you're able to have somebody actually buy it for you and own it, and basically they help facilitate your sale. That's a better model, just in terms of cash outflow. And the other thing I'd say is the CPG. I mean, software can scale pretty easily in a lot of senses, just mostly because, it's not like you're having to invest, Sean, to your point, a lot of capital. So in the case of CPG, you have to have all the inventory. And in a lot of cases, you may not know which brand, which color, which, all the characteristics of your product. You may not know which one is actually going to go the quickest. And so in a lot of cases, you actually have to front a lot more cash to make sure you have the inventory. And with, particularly with the internet and the way the modern world is, people will switch up, really quickly. You go on Amazon and somebody may find you through a search, or they find you through your website, or however they find you. The second it's like, oh, that's out of stock. And, if you're smart, you have something like, oh, we'll have it available to you in 3 weeks or a month or whatever it happens to be. The problem is they want it soon. So they're going to immediately go to your competitor. And Sean, you're right. You've created all this demand. You've gotten awareness. You've built up, some sort of brand recognition, and all of a sudden they switch to your competitor. So, I mean, I think having the right inventory at the right time is critical.
And so, I think that makes, we talked about the examples of like Nike and people who have been crazy high growth, but then also like, what about current environment? Maybe there are companies they're doing well, but also like nobody really wants to fundraise right now, if they can fundraise, and just trying to figure out how to kind of like stretch cash further, even if they're not in hyper growth, but just, kind of moderate growth. How are the challenges different for those brands? I'm sure a lot of whom are tuned in right now.
It's like one of these things where, Ed, you might be able to speak to this better because I'm not looking at this from a loan perspective, right? But one of the challenges when you take on a loan is they typically have relatively strict like repayment covenants, right? Like you have to pay a certain amount every single month. And that can be pretty painful, right? If you had whatever reason, consumer demand shifts, and people are now buying more fashion items to go out again, right? And they're buying fewer stay-at-home items, because we're seeing some shifts in consumer demand, or, inflation is high, people's ability to spend is going down, whatever else. But if you have typical financing, they are generally insensitive to your, challenges, right? And I think one of the strengths of the underlying consignment model is that the payment obligation is really created when the inventory is sold, right? And so it can be a solution that is more forgiving if there is a slight disruption to the expected demand cycle that a product entrepreneur would have. Obviously, it's not perfect. If you fund $1 million and you only sell $100,000, you're still going to have some real challenges, right? So I don't want to say that it's like, there's no liability or anything like that, but I do think that the consignment model is intentionally slightly more favorable to the entrepreneur than the typical model.
It's pretty interesting. So like, I understand what you're saying, which is like, there's this, your model basically, instead of a bank or something, or where you'd be taking in a loan, you have to pay a certain percentage every month. With your kind of a model, you have the inventory, and so it's on consignment, and you're only going to basically have to pay for it when you come to pick up the inventory to sell it. But how did, like, what if it just sits for longer than people are expecting? Does the rate go up at that point? Does it start compounding over a certain number of months, or is the rate higher than what you would get through other loans? Like what's the kind of, how to play it forward?
Yeah, so we have essentially our businesses agree to a certain consignment profit per month to offer to their funders. And then let's say it takes them 8 months to sell through the inventory as opposed to 6 months to sell through the inventory. What we typically do is we ask the business to true up the consignment profit to account for those other 2 months. Contractually, the way consignment works, though, is that the rate is set on the front end. So, that's one of the kind of interesting aspects of the way that our business operates.
Okay, we have a question from Veronica, which is, what are the requirements for people who want to work with you? I know you mentioned 500K in trailing revenue for 12 months. Anything else about like how long people have been around, or how much inventory they have, or like, what kind of POs they're sitting on, or manufacturing orders?
Yeah, well, to Ed's point, we don't require that you're sitting on assets. In fact, it's a lot better typically with us to fund the production of new inventory, because that won't have any other liens or any other obligations attached to it. So we prefer to fund new inventory, the production of new inventory typically. Additional restrictions are physical products, right? We don't do software. There's other people that do that, and they're happy to do it. So it's physical product goods. It's US based companies. $500,000 of trailing 12 months revenue. And then we are not currently working with restricted products. So if you think, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and we're also not currently allowing frozen or refrigerated products. Oh, and 1 year shelf life, but those are the main restrictions.
Minimum 1 year shelf life.
Minimum 1 year shelf stable unless you have a purchase order, right? If you've got a Wegmans PO or something for your lettuce, we can have a discussion around that.
Okay, got it. So, okay, maybe a little bit of flexibility depending on the situation. And what, like, I'm sure it changes for each person you work with, but like, what are rates like generally? Is there a range you can give, or some kind of I don't even know where to guess. So.
Yeah, it's so we are at about the best it's ever been, and this was prior to rates going kind of nuts in the last year, right? We funded inventory at 0.85%, so 85 basis points of consignment profit per month. So they did like a 8.5% consignment profit for a 10-month selling period. That was the lowest we've seen. Today, we're seeing roughly about 1.3% consignment profit per month. So you can imagine if you're, let's say we'll call it 1.5, right? So expected selling period of 4 months, that's 6%. If your original cost is $1, right, you expect to pay $1.06 per unit sold when the inventory is sold after a 4-month period. And that it's worth noting that is variable based on our qualification criteria, right? So that can scale. I think the highest we're seeing today is about 2.5% consignment profit per month.
So what, like, is it when people come to you with one of these requests, are you kind of like going out then to the lending market to then get a loan? That's why it's variable, is because like you're basically going out and getting whatever the market rate is and then bringing it back.
Well, we have essentially a group of liquidity providers that are already on the platform that have already communicated their buy box to us, right? And so we have our own qualification criteria. We run the business through our qualification method. We communicate that to the liquidity providers. We already kind of have an idea of where they're willing to provide funding. And then we can essentially provide that insight to the entrepreneur about what it would cost to have their inventory funded through the Kickfurther marketplace.
Cool. Okay. With the big StartupCPG discount, of course. The half price rates. Okay, cool. Guys, keep the questions coming, please. Okay, so the second one, I know we've talked in and around some of these, but so why is cash flow the lifeblood of a business, especially these days? And is it true for inventory-based brands? Ed, do you want to tap in?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, why is it the lifeblood? I mean, you need to have ample funding to be able to fund whatever comes about. I mean, one of the, I guess, strengths and weaknesses of a true startup, and especially a high growth startup, is that, you have things that come to you unexpectedly, both positive and negative. And, you have to have the funds to be able to address them. And, having substantial cash, both in your bank and that you can draw upon, is so vital. I mean, Sean was kind of, The experience with my client with Kickfurther is that we've actually started escalating the amount that we're taking out in the inventory. So it's been a really nice process to be able to start looking at longer term orders and things like that, because one of the things we're doing is we're utilizing that to fund the inventory, and then being able to, one of the issues we had is we were, there were some different parameters in the business, but basically we had to draw down some of the marketing and sales spend. And so what Kickfurther is allowing us to do is not worry as much about deploying the cash out for inventory, but then to focus it really on driving demand creation.
Okay.
And it's still early. I mean, we've only kicked this off, short time ago, but it's really starting to work.
So
I mean, even this morning, I was happy to see the number, we get a daily flash report. I was happy to see the numbers are just starting to climb again, because we're able to deploy more money in sales marketing.
I wonder, Ed, if you could take us through kind of like a quick 101 of like, cash flow and finance, just since you've done this a few times around. Like, let's say you're working with a new brand that's lucky enough to get to work with somebody as experienced as you are, and they're just starting. Let's say they're either self-funding or they've just raised some money. Like what's all the stuff you're going to tell them they need to look out for on cash flow and be planning for, and in the first year of the business?
Sure. I mean, I think more than anything else, it's demand volatility. Even if you've started commercializing and you're like, we're doing great, you could have any sort of micro or macro impacts. I mean, one of the things that, is really happening right now is, it's the summer. So we have the seasonality of the summer. And for the business that I'm helping to support, it's really, actually a fair amount of them, it's really the seasonality of the summer months. And so I think more than anything else, you start looking at it from the standpoint of, what are my major risks? The first one is obviously cash in the door. So it's your revenue. It's, are your receivables getting paid timely? A lot of times, particularly when we get into recessions, people start to pull back their money. So instead of your AR being, 30, 40 days out, it starts becoming 50, 60. Well, that 10 to 20 days can be a substantial amount of money. So it's the cash in, then it's the cash out. Do you have any incidentals? Do you have any cost increase you're expecting? Like your inventory may be, you may be paying a set amount, but if you don't have a contract with your supplier and all of a sudden they're like, guys, our raw materials are going up. Or if you have, raw materials that are hard to acquire, sometimes you can have real price, increases that you didn't necessarily plan for. So you really got to look for your cash out. Just in the cash out, you can break it out into multiple pieces, but the first one is the known one. So your delivery of, goods in, any sort of services. Then the other one is people. One of the biggest things people forget is, your asset is both your product, but it's also your people. And so, one of the things we always plan for is, you may have a sales force of 4 people, 5 people, or you may have just, 4 or 5 distributors or whatever your network and your chain out is, your channels. If one of them falls, that can be a big impact. So a lot of times, the way I've always kind of looked at it is you approach it with identifying all your major risks and then basically quantifying it and saying, okay, if I had any one of these factors happen in any of these areas, what's my exposure? And if it's 200,000, 500,000, 50,000, whatever the size of your business, do I have enough cash that I can make it through that period of time and still be able to fund my operations? So I think having more cash in the bank, I mean, you don't want to go back to the old mattress model where people, to the Great Depression, hid money in their mattresses. But I mean, in a lot of ways, that's what you can have bank accounts that really are your mattress. Maybe you have an operating with your major cash flow, but every couple months you throw, 50, 100,000 as you're growing, some sort of percentage of your overall growth into an account and say, this is my rainy day fund. I mean, ironically, we should do it as individuals too. But yeah, for a business, it's really just, because you're going to hit pitfalls. I mean, no business ever just goes like this. There's always some, waves to it. And I think the businesses that fail, even if they have a great product, a great team, all the parameters, are the ones that don't, you hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. And it's really true with cash.
And it's those same things that you just mentioned that usually if like there's something that could wipe out all of your cash, it's that stuff
Mhm.
or product issues probably.
Oh, absolutely. Product recall is like the worst thing you could have. And obviously, it's different with different businesses, like I spent some of my years in medical, and if you have a product recall, you're pretty much done. For, consumer products, it's really like you have a recall or something wrong, you can, destroy your brand reputation, it can really dramatically impact your sales and your potential growth. But yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of product risks.
Okay, we've got some questions coming in and I'll get back to the list. Somebody asked, what if you don't have 500K in trailing revenue, which was the requirement for Kick Further, but you get a PO from a major retailer or large account? Would you guys be flexible on something like that if there's a PO in hand from a big account?
So we don't do AR. We only fund inventory. I would say we have some like PO finance and AR factoring partners that I think would likely be a better fit for something like that. So I would say definitely feel free to reach out, and we're happy to provide the inventory once you get past that growth benchmark. And until then, I think we've got a decent network of partners that we'd be happy to introduce you to.
Cool. And probably, can you just let everyone know your email again, just in case anyone wants to reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. It's Sean, SEAN @kickfurther.com. Founder email's pretty simple.
Yeah, cool. Okay, and then Nate was asking, when you mentioned there are a couple of spaces you're not in, like ATF. I think he was wondering about alcohol, like beer and spirits, if you have plans to get into that space in the future.
Yeah, I would like to get there. It'd be fun to try out those samples, So I would say we plan to get there. I don't have a timeline for you, so I wouldn't wait for us. Do what you need to do for your business. But yeah, absolutely, in the future, that's something I want to grow into.
Of all the ways you could try to help your cash flow, like different lending options, you mentioned there are some that do like. Can you just explain what some of the other options are, like AR financing and stuff, just because a lot of us probably don't know that the differences between that and the inventory financing that you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ed can probably do a better job than me. Ed, do you want to take a crack at it?
Sure. Yeah, no. So the biggest one, which I think everybody, is AR financing, which is basically, you get funded on your flow of funds coming in from customers. So if you have a running AR balance of, a couple $100,000, then you get funded on that. Basically, they take a factor of that. They say, hey, we'll give you a percentage, 10-20% of that. And what it allows you to do is basically, it's almost like you get the money quicker. So you're getting the money in your bank account rather than having it just sit there and waiting for it to come in from the customer.
It's like a payday, payday loan.
Huh?
Like a payday loan?
Yeah, very similar in concept. Obviously more, a little more sophisticated, but yeah, it's basically that concept. There's the asset backed, which, you can have any number of assets that you get funded. For a lot of folks though, it ends up being inventory, it ends up being, equipment. And basically they take a lien against your assets. So they'll fund you based on a percentage of those assets. Assuming of course, look, you bought $100,000 piece of equipment. You have to aggregate it up for all your equipment, but you bought $100,000 piece of equipment. It's salvage value at the end of the day. What they could really get for it is $40,000 just because it's used. They'll fund you based on, a factor of that 40,000 salvage value, or, basically the cost they could get by selling it off. Yeah. And then, obviously there's other ones too. You can get a traditional bank loan. Issues with a lot of these things though, is you have to do a personal guarantee. So, if you're in a small enough business and you have enough control, that might make sense. But for a lot of founders, they just don't want to put, they don't want to put their house at risk because, their business had a bad quarter. So
So you don't have to for things like Kick Further.
No, I don't. John's
It's
right.
not required. I would say it's not required. It is preferred by the liquidity providers, right? So it's one of those things that gets you more access to more liquidity. Yeah, I would say there's also daily debit, right? Like those merchant cash advance daily debit. There's still a bunch of folks there that are pretty active. Anything that's driving off of your revenue, one of the things that I do think is helpful with consignment is that it's an increase on your cost of goods as opposed to a discount on your revenue, right? So you get to keep more of your margin when you're using consignment as a funding mechanism as opposed to a revenue discount mechanism like AR factoring or daily debit products. And I would encourage, if you can, meet with the SBA. We do see that SBA loans are great, and typically they don't get you too over leveraged. And then I think there's equity finance, right? Selling chunks of your business, which ultimately, reduces your long-term outcomes. But if you've got someone that's willing to write you a check, it can be very helpful, particularly in the early stages, right? When other sources of finance aren't as available. The only thing I would say with equity is it's one of those things where it's like once you start doing it, it's hard to stop, and then very quickly you end up with more dilution than you would expect, right? So it's kind of like almost better to figure out another path than equity early on.
Okay, great. So the next one here, how can you prepare your supply chain for larger and more frequent inventory purchases?
I'll jump in on this one. So I would say, like, one of the things that I see as this ongoing persistent risk factor with entrepreneurs we work with is they don't have a redundant supply chain, right? So people like get a factory, they're like, sweet, this factory's great. I placed a bunch of orders with them. They haven't had a problem, right? And then they're running their business, they're all happy, and then there's a heat wave in China and they can't get inventory for 6 weeks, right? Or like the production schedule gets pushed back, and guess what the factory's going to do? They're going to prioritize their biggest clients, right? And then all of your stuff is getting pushed to the very end of the line, and you just have no leverage. You've got no negotiating power. Why? Because you don't have any redundancy, right? You've got no ability to go place your order with somebody else. And here's the other thing: you have zero negotiating power when that time comes, right? And you need to place your order with that factory. That's the worst time to try to negotiate with another factory because you just have no leverage, right? So this is what I encourage every entrepreneur to do. Every entrepreneur in this call, we have a free product called Snowmelt, and it literally is a product specification device. We've run this as a customer success for a lot of the entrepreneurs we work with. We offer to do this for free because we see this as a method of mitigating risk to the businesses that we're providing funding for. So essentially what this does, it gives you the ability, and you don't have to use our app, do this yourself, right? But create a specification sheet of the product you want to buy, right? No, actually, what is the product, right? What's the cotton that your t-shirts are being made out of, right? Like, how are they printing on the t-shirts? There's like 8 different methods of printing on t-shirts. Do you know which one your factory is doing to deliver the quality that you want? If you don't, that's a risk factor, right? So I would argue that product entrepreneurs have a responsibility, right, to understand the specifications of their own product, write it down, right, and to start to source quotes from other manufacturers before the day comes that their current manufacturer is unable to deliver the service they need, right? So get ahead of this, because if you don't get ahead of it, when it happens, and it almost always happens, at some point it will happen, right? If you're successful enough and you keep growing your business, I can almost guarantee it will happen, right? If you wait until it happens, it's going to be very painful. If you get ahead of it and you have competing quotes from 3 different factories, right, that you just know, like, oh, if I have to switch my manufacturer, it costs me 2% more. That's a much stronger position to be in than only having one factory and not even knowing, right, 100% exactly what you're buying, right? Because the time to get that information from the factory is before you place the order, right? Like, hey, I'm going to buy 10,000 t-shirts from you, but first, please fill out this sheet that describes exactly what I'm buying. Right? The day before you place that $10,000 unit order, you've got a lot of leverage. The day after, you've got none. right? And so it's like, get the information when you have the leverage as a product entrepreneur. And then if you have a redundant supply chain, not only does that protect you from the downside of a supply chain shock or a manufacturing issue, it also gives you the ability to ramp up to capture demand opportunities, right? Like, oh, I need 50,000 units next month instead of 20,000 units. If you only have one factory, it's very likely they won't be able to provide that capacity. If you have three, you're very likely to be able to do what you need to do and to deliver on what are often timely, demand-based things, right? You get a PO from Target, they need it on X day. They can't wait for your supply chain to catch up, right? So again, getting ahead of this is like, this is literally what I did though in supply chain. So I'm kind of talking like my experience, like as a product business, like get ahead of your supply chain issues because it's really painful if you wait for them to crop up,
Yes, I know all about that. All right, cool. I'm excited for this next one. So when is it time to evaluate outside capital? How do you evaluate it when you do get there? And I'm, just interested in for the perspective of like people who have probably bootstrapped or maybe done some angel rounds. When do they need to think about going big, and when do they absolutely need to have some of this money in the bank, just given it can take a while to raise sometimes, probably longer than you think.
Yeah, so exactly that. Before you think you need it, right? So know what your options are. Again, the more desperate you are, if you really, really need the finance, right, your leverage and your ability to negotiate is worse, right? So it's like when you start, and it's like, you know what it is? It's like, do you have product market fit? Are you pretty confident that you can like continue to sell your product into a market that wants to buy it? When you feel, and it's like this, it's kind of a moment of feeling, right? But when the entrepreneur feels that they have product market fit, start to evaluate your financing options then, right? When you have a lot of leverage, when your business is growing, when it's generating cash, because if you only wait until you desperately need something, right, then you're going to have to take the money that's available on their timeline, not on yours. And then typically the terms are worse.
I would absolutely agree with Sean. I think it's you gotta have the leverage. And if you think about it from a timeline perspective, I would say 6 to 9 months before you need it. Because it does take time, particularly if you're going for bigger venture, any sort of, family office, some of these angels. I mean, angels are starting to do more what venture does in terms of the rigor of diligence and the rigor of, the assessment process. So, and honestly, it's one of those things, and it's a tough toggle for every entrepreneur, but at some point you're going, okay, if I keep bootstrapping this will be worth 5 million. If I take outside money, even if I have to give up 50% of it, this could be worth 30 million. I mean, at some point you start doing that math, and it's a teeter-totter of my bootstrap only gets me to here. Even though I have to give up some of the value, I can get way up here. So it's really about, I think, ultimately the goal the entrepreneur has and where they want the business to go.
So I was just thinking about, like, there are some differences, obviously, when you're talking to angels versus kind of proper VCs in the due diligence that they're going to do on the business. Obviously, like, some angels might just take a flyer on a founder or a product that they like. VCs more structured, are really going to get up in your business on the books. How much do you get up in our business, Sean, in the books and stuff when you're talking to people? Like, what kind of due diligence do you typically do on brands if they meet your 500K criteria? How closely are you looking?
We get pretty up in your business. I won't lie, right? Like the reality is we try to provide a very premium service. That means we do have to be relatively selective because, we're funding inventory at 100% COGS. It's pay as you sell, right? There's a lot of flexibility for the entrepreneur, and that means, we have to be pretty selective. So we will ask for, data linking, the more information we get, the better we're able to qualify a business. And that typically translates to a lower cost of funding through the marketplace. So I think that's going to be the case.
Yeah, you typically are like, obviously you're going to want to know the sales history and forecast, and like probably like, do you look at how much funding they're sitting on, or the P&L or balance sheet, stuff like that?
Yeah, we'll typically ingest what we're looking for. The 3 primary data sources that we would ask for would be direct bank data, to the extent possible. We would ask for, if you have e-commerce, real-time e-commerce and inventory data, if possible, and then accounting data. So those are the 3 data sources we would like to have. The one that is required is the bank data. The other 2 are kind of nice to haves. Again, they add to the profile. And then we also, dig in a little bit to the supply chain, right? We're in the world of physical goods. We are going to verify the cost of goods. We're going to verify the supplier and the manufacturer relationship. So we do a little bit of work there as well.
Okay, a couple more questions coming in. Steven asks, is there flexibility on frozen if there's a big PO, like you mentioned with like lettuce?
So right now, not with frozen. Again, I have some AR factor partners, right, that are pretty interested, and we don't really touch AR, but they don't have restrictions around frozen, right? Because once it's AR, it's a very different kind of transaction. So right now, we have partners that can support that kind of transaction, but we're not doing it ourselves. Eventually, I want to get there. It's just a risk around frozen refrigerated goods that I need to understand how we calibrate within our marketplace. And so, I feel like frozen is more likely for us to get to than, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms in a nearer term.
All right. Okay, so then Veronica's asking, is there a rate of cash flow to revenue that a business should try to have? How much, or like
as high as possible?
I'm not a finance person, but I think basically what she's asking is like, how much cash do you need based or to like verse your sales or whatever to feel like you have a good buffer as you grow? Like, what does the ratio need to be?
I always like 90 days, 90 days of revenue. Obviously that's aspirational for a lot of businesses, but I would love that, and I always think about, if my revenue dried up, could I fund the business for 90 days? Not that would ever happen, but in having that 90 days, if you did have a bump in your revenue, you're able, then depending on how much of a bump, it could be, you're good for 60, 6 months, 9 months, or even a year, depending on if it's only like a 25% or 50% cut. So I always try to say, multiply my revenue times 3 months. And that's how much cash I'd ideally like to have on the books.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's like an emergency fund as an individual, right? Like, how big's your emergency fund? If you lost your income, right, how long are you able to go before things get really tough? I mean, 90 days feels good, and then more is better.
Yes, got it. That's hard for a brand to move back in with their parents. I know. Okay. Cool. Last question here. So can you make it out of high growth without giving up equity?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's certainly there are now exit opportunities that didn't really exist, right, 10 years ago. I don't know what you guys are seeing now in the like the market of the Thrazios and the Perches and the Seller X's, right? But they had all these aggregators that were providing pretty compelling exits like a year and a half ago. I think that slowed down a bit, but I can bet you that when the market comes back, that activity will come back again as well. So I think that there are compelling exit opportunities that are coming earlier than there used to be for product businesses, which makes it easier to get there without giving up equity. And I think that there are plenty, not just Kick Further, but any of those revenue financing things that we talked about, right? All those revenue finance guys typically are non-dilutive as well. So I think there's way more options today to do that than there were a decade ago.
Very good. Ed, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, because I think the other factor is a lot of these were smoke and mirrors. Particularly, I hate to pick on the software, but a lot of the software is smoke and mirrors. You don't have anything tangible. With the consumer good, you have something tangible at the end of the day. So, I mean, I think, we're getting more and more back to the fundamentals, and a solid consumer-based business is a solid business. You can count on it. So I think investors know that and are starting to appreciate that again, which is a really good sign.
Very good. All right. Those are all the questions that we had to go through today. I don't know if you guys want to make any wrap-up comments, and maybe you could just each give your email or website or the, best way for people to get in touch?
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me, Daniel. I would say always great. I love connecting with entrepreneurs. Please feel free to reach out, even if you guys just want to jam about supply chain, anything else, like, at the end of the day, we are here to support the growth of entrepreneurs. We have a bunch of supply chain experts in the business as well. So if you'd like, to just have a chat, we're always happy to build the relationship even ahead of being able to provide financing. So please feel free to reach out. We try to be very entrepreneur friendly and very entrepreneur forward. Website is kickfurther.com. You can reach me directly. Best way is email through Sean@kickfurther.com. But you can also sometimes find me on LinkedIn.
And is the name because like you're trying to kick the can further down the road when you go for financing?
So when we started this 10 years ago, Kickstarter was like a major brand, right? And like they've really gotten way quiet in the last 10 years. And so we were kind of like, oh, you got started, right? And now you can go further, and they can't own the word kick, So that was the original idea. But now I'm like, man, I think we might be doing more volume than they are at this point. So
Congrats.
I'll take it.
All right. Ed?
Yeah, so thank you. I mean, I really appreciate being here. I love helping, startup businesses, founders, they do amazing stuff. It's not for the faint of heart. So, but yeah, I'm happy to help in any way. Obviously, either I'm happy to answer just questions, or if you want more established financial support, I can be reached at esawyer@avlgrowth.com. But yeah, AVL Growth is we help startup businesses, growth businesses. The whole goal is to provide financial support for whatever the business needs. So, but yeah, thank you again for being here. This is fun.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone, for all the questions and engagement. And feel free to reach out to these guys with any additional questions. And I will see you all on the Slack.
Awesome.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Bye.